Good evening and welcome to See You at USC. I'm your Monday night host, Alexia Narcisse, and I'm here today with Wall Street Journal reporter Ben Fritz. Stay tuned. We are back live with Ben Fritz of the Wall Street Journal. How are you?
Okay, thanks.
Fantastic. Now, for those of you who don't know, he has had a nearly 20-year lifespan in journalism. And I want to learn and just dig a bit deeper on what your career has been, how you have seen the field change so much, and what your experience has been in journalism. So let's start from the beginning. How did you even find your way into journalism?
Sure. Well, I was always interested in journalism. I loved magazines and newspapers growing up. And my first real job was an internship at the Hollywood paper Variety.
Okay.
I was sort of interested in learning about the entertainment industry, and it turned out that I was looking for internships, and I found out that Variety had an internship. And the then editor of the paper had gone to my college, and I sort of asked him for advice on Hollywood, and he was like, well, maybe you should apply for our internship. And I did, and I kind of quickly discovered pretty quickly that I actually liked covering Hollywood more than wanting to work in Hollywood, because I met a lot of people who worked in the industry, and I discovered that sort of like I got to talk to a lot of interesting people who did all sorts of things. I got to learn something new every day. I got to use my writing skills and my sort of what in college had been research skills, or pretty similar to reporting skills. And I was learning new things every day, and to me that quickly became like a really appealing job, and I pretty much stuck with it.
Now, did you always know that you were going to go into print, or was there ever a moment that you were like, maybe I'll do broadcast, maybe I'll do a different realm?
I knew I wasn't going to do broadcast. I knew I could not do what you're doing right now. Like, I would be camera shy. I don't like to have, I don't like to worry about dressing up.
No.
I don't like to worry about, about makeup. That was not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I like writing, and I like the flexibility of the job. And I think of myself as I write a lot for online, and in fact, my first job was for an online-only publication during the first .com boom in 2002 or so the tail end of that. But I've always known I wanted to be a journalist who wrote. Yeah.
And was Hollywood your niche, or did you kind of just stumble into it?
No, Hollywood was something I definitely pursued. It's not the only thing I've ever covered in my career. I've done some political coverage as well. But for whatever weird reasons, I found the entertainment industry really interesting. I always did. I love movies and TV shows and video games and all sorts of stuff, music. And once I sort of learned there's a real business behind it, and when you understand that business, you understand why you get the movies or shows or music that you do. To me, that, I don't know, it's just really, really fascinating.
Now, I don't know in what ways journalism has changed throughout the years, but I know that for us currently, coming out of school, journalism is not the highest paying job. And a lot of people are straight away for it for this very reason. So was it like that when you first started?
It was definitely not as challenging as it is now, but certainly it was clear the industry was changing. Again, there was the first .com boom, the internet. Everybody thought the internet was just going to take over and destroy television and destroy newspapers and everything. It hadn't happened yet, but everybody thought it was just around the corner. On the one hand, it was a better job market, but in terms of like what is the future of journalism going to be, it was very uncertain. And then what also happened is within a year of my joining, the .com boom became the .com bust. The publication I worked for, which was really sort of a product of the .com boom, quickly had financial problems. People were getting laid off left and right. My responsibility, my job responsibilities were going up. My pay was flatlining, and and I was laid. It was not the first journalism job I was laid off from. It was the first of several. So yeah, it's always been a challenging field, and my friends who did other things that seemed like easier jobs were making more money, but I knew it would not. They were not having careers that I thought were as interesting.
Yeah. So what really convinced you to stay? Because with the skill sets that you gained from journalism, I can only assume that you could have worked anywhere at that point.
Yeah, I don't know anywhere, but there's certainly other things I could do, and. But journalism is one of those jobs I would say to people, like, if you can imagine yourself doing something else, do that. You know, if you can only imagine yourself being a journalist, and that's what you should do, because it's hard to get a job. You're not going to be paid that well for the amount of hours and work you put into it and qualifications you need. And, you know, and it's the kind of job where you're on call 24/7, you know, and you can be on vacation, or it can be in the middle of the night or the weekend, like things come up, you know. So you have to really love it and find it fulfilling, more fulfilling than any other options. But for me, that just quickly became true. I've explored other careers. I briefly went to graduate school thinking maybe I'd become a professor, big mistake. And, you know, just nothing else to date has ever appealed to me nearly as much as journalism does.
That's so incredible, because you were able to find your passion
Yeah.
so early.
Yeah.
Now, you also reported at the Los Angeles Times, correct?
Yes.
And what was that like? Because I understand that different news stations can be different
Sure.
in environment.
Sure. Every newspaper I've written for is very different. You know, of course, they're different organizations, different people, but the biggest thing I'd say is they have a different audience that you're writing for, right? So I started off, after my internship, for a few twists and turns, I ended up back at Variety. I worked there for a few years, and that's a publication. The industry is really, the audience, is people in the entertainment industry, right? It's a pretty small circulation, I forget, 30, 50,000 at the time, and they all work in Hollywood. So you're writing for a very well-informed audience that wants, there's no news too small for them, you know?
Yeah.
They want to know everything going on in Hollywood. And the LA Times is a bigger audience, where you're speaking, ideally we're speaking to people in the industry because it's their hometown paper, but we're also speaking to people across California who subscribe, and then to the internet all over the world. So it has to be more accessible to them. So the standard of what we considered news suddenly got a lot higher. You wouldn't cover the smallest little things you might cover at Variety. And then it was challenging. You have to write things that are interesting to someone who maybe works at Warner Brothers or Disney, but so it's not boring to them, but yet it's still understandable to someone who has nothing to do with the entertainment industry, you know, who's a teacher or a lawyer or whatever, and just, you know, is a regular person.
Yeah. So within your time at the LA Times, I know, and currently you did a lot in entertainment and working with the Walt Disney Company. And I wonder what that's like working with such a huge company, and being in journalism, we're always, you know, asked to report the truth, to reveal information, and to not really be afraid to follow the code of ethics. So what was that like for you working with like a massive multimedia company?
Sure. So covering Disney is definitely the most challenging part of my job. So every major public company in the U.S. is assigned a Wall Street Journal reporter to cover. So someone covers Walmart, someone covers GE.
Okay.
You know, we're a business-focused publication, so we cover the biggest companies, of course. So a big part of my job is covering the Walt Disney Company, and that means their movies, their theme parks, their toys, their TV shows, and of course the sort of corporate suites, the CEO Bob Iger and his team. It's definitely challenging because on the one hand it seems like it'd be fun, and you know I like Disney products as much as anyone else, but you have to stay focused on thinking of it as a business, and you know I have to get to know people who work there in order to cover them, but yet they can't be my friends, right? Because I have to write, I'm going to write things they don't like sometimes, and I have to sort of get to know them and hopefully earn their respect, and it's a very complicated relationship. Sometimes we're getting along well with people there. Sometimes it's a very antagonistic relationship where they are very unhappy about a story I'm pursuing or I've just written, and you know, I'm unhappy with maybe they're not telling me something I want them to tell me. Maybe they're trying to hide information that I'm trying to get. They're doing their job is to protect the image of their company, and my job is to report the truth about their company, including stories that are unpleasant. And so it's a relationship. It's challenging. It's up and down. I've had huge fights with people who work there. You know, I've gone to movie premieres of Disney and had a lot of fun. And it just depends. I think at the end of the day, if you ask someone, I would, you know, I hope they would say that they respect me and they respect the job I'm doing, and they know my job is to sometimes make them unhappy. And you know, I say the same thing. I don't take anything they do personally, but yet I'm also not just gonna sort of take no for an answer.
That's excellent. So I'm curious, as for people who are not in journalism, that would like to know what a day-to-day looks like for a journalist, because it's a job really like no other.
Right. So if you work for a newspaper like I do, and you're a beat reporter, meaning you have something that you're supposed to cover the news for day to day, which in my case is Disney and the film industry, the movie studios. You know, the biggest part is trying to know what's happening and be on top of information. You know, my job is maybe 2/3 reporting and 1/3 writing. So I don't just want to sit back and rely on press releases, right? I need to go out and learn new things. So I'm talking to people on the phone, calling people on the phone who I haven't spoken to in a while, to just sort of find an excuse to talk to them, you know, and pick their brain about stuff. I go out for lunches or breakfast meetings like almost every day.
Wow.
You know, I got to meet new, I try to just, someone I know who I haven't spoken to in a while, or someone who I met at a premiere or through someone else. I'll say, hey, can I buy you a meal or something? I just want, you know so much about the industry. You've been around so much longer than I have. I'd love to just pick your brain and find out what you think is interesting, and flatter them as much as I can, and get them talking, because you never know what they heard yesterday or was going on at their company, and they might mention casually, and I'd be like, oh, that would be a really interesting story. Or if I connect that to that thing I heard from somebody else last month, then there's a trend happening, and maybe that'd be a story. And you never know where the stories are going to come from, and the only way to find them is to talk to people all the time. So I'm doing that a lot, and then once I get going on a story, I'm calling people who I think might have more information to get their take on it. And then, I'm also dealing with stuff inside the journal. I have an editor who works in our office here in LA, and I'm telling him my story ideas, and he's giving me feedback. Sometimes we're getting feedback from the more senior editors in New York at our headquarters, dealing with them. And then, of course, I have to write. In some cases, I'm just working on stories that are long-term. In some cases, it's breaking news that day. Right? Sometimes something big happens, like, Bob Iger just extended his contract to run Disney, or if you remember this, there was a hack of Sony Pictures a couple of years ago. There was a huge story, and there are just things happening I'm trying to keep up with. Sometimes if none of that's happening, then I'm working on a more of a trend piece or a feature that maybe is going to take a week or two or three, and I'm just plugging away at it.
Wow. Okay. So when you're meeting with people and talking to them, I understand that it might be a bit easier to talk to them as a print journalist, because you don't have a camera in their face, you don't have a recorder up to them. But do you feel that has been a difficult or a more advantageous experience for you?
Compared to being a video reporter?
I guess you could say.
I think so, because the number one thing is most of my meetings are off the record.
Right, okay.
If people know, that you might be quoting everything they say, they're very careful about what they say, the same way that you are if there's a camera in front of your face. So usually I'll say these meetings are off the record. Don't worry, I'm not quoting you. Nobody's going to know we spoke. And then if they tell me something interesting, then I might follow up and say, hey, can I interview you on the record about this thing you just said?
Okay.
Or, you know what, you don't want to be in the story, and that's okay. But as long as I know this information, then I'll take this information and I'll confirm it with somebody else. And then I'll find an outsider who can quote, give me a quote about it. Some of my best stories, I've done the actual sources of the story. They're not named in the story at all, and you'll never know who they are, because those people are not supposed to be talking to me, right? So they're essentially secret, anonymous conversations. People who are quoted by name are usually not going to give you the most interesting news.
We're going to leave it on that note, because that quote is so powerful.
Okay.
And when we come back after the break, we're going to talk more about your personal life.
Okay.
And that's the scary part. And a bit about how social media has changed the journalism game. Stay tuned. We're back with Ben Fritz of the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
Now, I have to know about your book. There's a book coming out, but you already have a book as well.
Right. Well, I co-wrote a book that came out in 2004 about politics in the media. That came out of a blog I did with two friends, and that book's called All the President's Spin. Available, I think it's available used on Amazon for 1 cent. So I promise you'll get your money's worth. And that was a really fun experience, and sort of tied to that election campaign then.
Okay, so it's about Bush and the media.
Yeah, it's about Bush and the media. It's about how politicians can use the media to deceive without lying. That was sort of the idea. Politicians rarely lie, but they more often will sort of they'll deceive you, essentially. They can use the media for that purpose, was the idea.
Wow. Okay.
That's the idea there. I'm working on a book now, my first solo book, that's about the movie industry, about a topic I know really well now, and how it's changed and how it became so obsessed with franchises, with reboots, superheroes, sequels. And the core material for the book is I want to sort of go inside a studio and see how they work. Of course, no studio is going to be like, hey, come hang out with us for 6 months and go to every meeting. But there was this hack of Sony Pictures 2 years ago, and tens of thousands of emails and documents came out, and I'm basically using those to go. I've read every one of them, and I go inside a studio, see how that studio, Sony, operates, and how how they've dealt with the challenges of the movie business as it's changed from being focused on original stuff to being almost all sequels and spin-offs and so on. And so that kind of sort of provides a lot of insight into how the movie business works today.
Now, for people reading your book, can they expect to get a bit of a journalistic perspective as well? Is it going to be like a long-term journalism piece, or are we going to expect more of a storyline kind of book?
I mean, I try to have narratives in it. I'm trying to tell stories, right? Like, here's how something happened, and I'm taking you inside somewhere. And so I'm taking you inside Sony, or there's a lot of history of Marvel Studios, how they became so big and successful. So it's all, it's nonfiction, it's all reporting, so there's a lot of journalism going into it, but it's definitely written differently than I would write an article for the newspaper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I do notice that you know everything about video games, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering where that passion came.
I became a video game player again as an adult due to my career. I played as a kid.
Wow.
I played as a kid like a lot of people, and then I stopped. Like in college, I stopped playing. And then when I worked at Variety, my job for a while was covering technology, which just sort of meant everything that was new was the idea. And one of those things was video games. I kind of got thrown into it. So I started learning about the industry a little bit. And then I sort of realized, hey, these games are really different than they were in the 90s, and they're kind of cool. And I started playing them, and I got a few for free that was sent by these companies I was covering. And then I got really into them, and then I really came to love them, and I became a video game player again, like in my mid to late 20s.
Wow. Okay. So I just spoke to a guy, I want to say a week ago, and he was telling me about a venture that he recently created, and it's an arena, an arcade for video game players.
Yeah.
So they have one, I think, within the Los Angeles area. It's somewhere near here. But essentially, video game people come and meet, and it's like a full-blown, like they're competing sides, and they have basically created like this concert environment where people come. There's like a cash prize of maybe like $5,000-$10,000, and they just compete and play games all day. And you can get a membership and go in and play games. Have you seen more places like this? Like, do you see entrepreneurship and video gaming becoming more prevalent?
Yeah, well, I've definitely seen there's been a minor explosion of like bars with old school arcade games in them. There's several of them in LA, and there's around the country that appeal to people like me who had arcades when we were kids. And so that's definitely become a sort of a business to go out and do them. And obviously, esports, when you go and see people competing to play games, is a huge booming business now. So yeah, games. Again, when I was a little kid, like in the 80s, they were sort of seen as this more nerdy thing that you did by yourself. They were not social at all, and now they become this very social experience. Whether you go out, or you watch people playing on Twitch or esports or whatever, or you're just playing online with a headset, which I do all the time, and talk to my friends while we're playing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't the biggest video game fans in the world but want to get started, do you have any suggestions?
It totally, it depends what kind of stuff you'd be into. I mean, the one thing I would say I've learned from covering the business is video games does not have to mean like you're playing Call of Duty and you're shooting people all the time. Like, there are games on your phone or your tablet that are, that you think of casual games, but they're still games. Like, games can be the really casual thing that you play on your phone in your spare time. The definition of games is really broad, and if you like one kind of game, then just sort of explore other stuff that's related to it.
Now, I want you to name like the top 3 games that
I've
you
ever
just
played?
live for. Yeah.
Well, my favorite game of all time is called Shadow of the Colossus. It's a Japanese Japanese video game. It's kind of has this very tragic ending to it, which I really love. It's got a really kind of emotional heft to it.
So it's one of those storyline games?
It's absolutely a storyline game, and you
Okay.
sort of find out that everything you've been doing has been a horrible mistake at the end of it, and that you really shouldn't have been doing it.
Oh my gosh.
Which I will never forget it. It's sort of a kind of a bit of a profound experience. I like Gears of War, which is like an action shooting game, just because I play that with my friends online all the time. So it's become this great social experience for me. And there's an indie game called Braid that I really love. It's made by one guy by himself. It's an indie game.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's really artistic and beautiful.
Wow. Okay. Now, when you're not playing video games, are you doing any sort of sports or?
Yeah, I play volleyball. I still play volleyball. I played in college on a D3
Well, you're
team.
tall.
Yeah, I'm tall, and it was D3. I wouldn't be playing for USC, believe me. But so that was really fun. And then when I came to LA, I sort of missed it. I'm not really a beach guy, and then I found out that the YMCA in Hollywood, they have indoor volleyball. And
wow. I never knew that.
Yeah, it's really and it's a really great crowd. It's kind of at my level, so I've been going there pretty regularly for quite a while.
Now, I'm going to assume that you're competitive.
I'm pretty competitive.
If you're playing video games and like this is all just a competitive spirit.
Yeah, I'm not the most competitive person. I don't need to win, I guess I would
Yeah.
say. But yeah, I like games, and I don't know, I like active things and our energy. Yeah, and so I like to compete, but as I've matured a bit, I don't get quite so upset when I lose as I used to 10 years ago.
Yeah, certainly. Now, it seems like you have this young spirit. No, truly.
Okay.
And so, one thing that really stood out to me is I see within the generation gap in journalism that, the older journalists tend to not want to use social media at all. But the younger ones, you guys are on Twitter, Instagram, you're posting what you're reporting. What has that been like in seeing that merge, that transition within the last 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, it totally changes the way we do our jobs, of course. I feel blessed that I sort of got to see the transition of journalism. When I first started in the early 2000s, I mean, there were websites, of course, but they were kind of afterthoughts, and your day was oriented around that deadline at the end of the day to get the print newspaper out, everything. And then it was like you'd write those, and then at night they'd put up the stories on the website, and that was that. And as time has changed, it started to be, when you have news, you got to get it online immediately, And then, of course, social media, you sort of realize you're having a conversation with your readers and with other journalists, and even after you post your story, you're talking more about it on there.
Yeah.
It's definitely, severely compressed, if not completely eliminated, what I would say was sort of the distance between yourself as a journalist and your readers.
Yeah, because they're there now.
They used to be
interacting,
far
right?
away, and now it just feels like it's a horizontal plane, and they're right there alongside you.
Now, do you feel like you're able to use social media to get new interviews or to build connections and expand your network?
Yeah, I've definitely. It helps to find. Sometimes if I'm looking for sort of regular people who are interested in something or commenting on it, you can find them on Twitter or Facebook. I would say LinkedIn is an amazing tool for finding people who may work or previously worked in a certain job at a certain company or whatever. It's helped research tools tremendously. And yet I've definitely gotten ideas for stories from just things people might say to me on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, seeing that the profession has changed so much and you are clearly an instrumental piece in what you're doing and within your beat in here in Los Angeles, do you have an idea of what you want your legacy to be in journalism?
That's a good question. I guess all I can say is especially in working on the book, I hope that, I will have sort of taken all these ideas I've gotten day to day in covering Hollywood and the film business and be able to say something bigger picture about this is how the business has changed this century. This is how we, the business, so I'm sort of stepping back to take a 10,000-foot view over something that day to day I'm covering very up close. And so I hope people will think that I, was a really, an important reporter in sort of chronicling, how Hollywood has changed this century. And I hope most important thing to me by far is that people would say that I'm a truthful and an ethical reporter. Those are the values that matter to me every day. And if people didn't say that about me, I would really feel like a failure.
Now, I have to ask this just because it's fun to look back on. But if you can predict anything in regards to entertainment, video games, the realm that you're beat, if you could predict something happening in the next 50 years, what would it be?
I've been thinking a lot about this for the book, actually, so it's a good moment. One thing I would say is I think people will look back and think about the lines between film and TV and even to a certain extent video games as really antiquated. Right now with or less and less every day, but the film is this thing you go out to the theater to see still, and it's this big piece of entertainment, and it's the most important thing in our pop culture still, and TV is the thing you watch in the box in your home. Maybe you start to watch on your phone sometimes, and then there's internet content, which is seen as somewhat different. There's games are interactive, they're different. But I think over time, what screen you watch it on or where is going to not matter to people anymore. I don't think there's going to be a real sense of what is a movie versus what is a TV show versus what is a game, because there'll be interactive elements to movies, and TV show might be 6 episodes that last 4 hours, but a movie lasts 3 hours, and you could, what is the difference anymore? That's what I think is changing, and will seem old-fashioned in a few decades.
So you kind of see everything merging together into a single platform.
Yeah, I think I was certainly the strict divisions between platforms and the definitions of media are gonna fall apart.
And do you predict any big power players that we would foresee within the next 10 years?
Well, I don't know who's gonna be the winner, but certainly again the divisions between the technology companies and the media companies are also gonna fall apart. You know, you see companies like Amazon becoming big players in film and TV recently. You see Apple dipping their toes into it. Facebook is a big video platform now. Obviously Netflix is both a technology and a content company.
Yeah.
You see the old content companies like Disney aggressively trying to get into tech. So those, I don't know who's going to be the big winner, but again, we're not going to say, oh, that's a technology company and that's a media company. They're going to kind of be the same thing.
Awesome. Now I have to thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, and I do hope that your prediction comes true, because we'll look back at this 40 years from now and you could say you said it prior. So for people who are interested in finding your book, I know that you haven't finalized everything yet, but if they want to find you on social media, we're going to put up your Twitter handle, which is
just at Ben Fritz.
Perfect. And is that for all your social media?
Twitter is the only one I'm sort of publicly active on, so that would be it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
We'll see you all next week.